So, welcome to Replenish, hope that sustains in the midst of adversity. This is a safe place where I invite special guests to share encouragement and insight to replenish us on the journey of raising kids who have experienced early life trauma. So, whether you're an adoptive, kinship, foster, or safe family, this conversation is for you. I'm your host, Tristan McGee, and I just want to invite you to the chat room. It's open. Feel free to ask questions, just check in with each other, comment. This conversation in the chat room, it's for you. So today I have invited Jana Hunsley to join us for a conversation about how trauma affects the entire family. So hi, Jana.
Hi.
Before we get started, let me tell everybody a little bit about you and some of the things that make you so amazing. So Jana Hunsley is a PhD candidate in experimental psychology at Texas Christian University's Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development, a licensed clinical social worker, a TBRI practitioner, and an advocate for foster and adoptive families. Her research focuses on understanding and meeting the needs of every member of the adoptive and foster families. Prior to her work at the Institute, Jana received her master's in social work from the University of Chicago and worked as a post-adoption therapist. Over the years, she has worked to meet the needs of children and adolescents who have experienced trauma in various settings, including outpatient counseling, in-home counseling, residential treatment facilities, institutional care, school settings, the child welfare system, and juvenile detention centers. Her interest in trauma and supporting families began when her family adopted 7 children internationally when she was a teenager. Like, wow, that is so amazing. So you've done so much. It sounds like you've been worked in about every single area you can when it comes to foster and adoption. And you are a sibling of 7 adopted kids. So I always start out asking the question, what started you on this journey into the world of foster and adoption? And it sounds like your bio gives us a little hint of that, but I'd love to hear it from you. Expound on that for us.
Yeah, definitely my family. That was my first siblings came home to my family when I was 16 years old. So I had the opportunity to actually fly to Taiwan with my parents and my younger brother to bring home my 3 newest brothers who are 5 and 6-year-old twins. And that experience completely changed my life. And I had no idea how much it changed my life at the moment. But that's really what led me on this journey. I think I had gone into our family adopting super excited, and I was really looking forward to having these 3 cute, adorable little boys as my brothers. My family had no idea about trauma, had no idea what we were getting into. And so it was, and there was no honeymoon period with my siblings. So we just went right into it from the first day that we picked them up from the orphanage and brought them back to our hotel room. It was just, trauma was very evident in all of their emotions and behaviors. And so we just went right into survival and just figured out how to live life. I'm from the Midwest, in an area where it's very resource deprived. And so my family really struggled to find the support and resources to meet the needs of my siblings. And so it was kind of just all hands on deck. And I'll talk about my sibling experience later when we get into that. But that's really what motivated me to go into this field, was because there weren't professionals out there who knew how to deal with trauma when it came to adoption. And when my siblings would we'd go to therapists with them, and the therapist would kind of treat them like they were bad kids, and didn't understand that this was trauma they'd experienced. And as a sibling, I would be like, I don't understand how they don't understand, and didn't realize at the time that most clinicians are not trained in this. And so I really wanted to go and become a post-adoption therapist to work with families who struggled like mine. And then that kind of led me on this whole journey where I've been in a lot of different settings. My goal was always just to get a lot of experience in a lot of different settings with trauma, because I didn't just want my experience at home to inform all of the work that I had done. I wanted to be in these different settings. So that's kind of what led me down the path that I have been on. And now I'm doing research at the Institute, where I get to create interventions and really dig in and understand more of what's happening in the family system beyond just the adopted child.
That is so awesome. I love that about you. I love that you have a big story to tell, but not only do you have a big story to tell and so many experiences and insights that you can share from that, that you wanted this to be your life work and that you wanted as much experience as you could get, and now you're getting your doctor, your PhD, that you were like, my story is not enough. I want more because there's more to it than that. And that, I just think that's so amazing that that's your life focus now. And I just have so much respect for that, that it's not just, it's that you're just using your story and building on it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's
That's
been quite the journey.
yes. So let's get right into it. I saw you on Replanted, which was an online virtual conference for foster adoptive families, and I just was blown away by your presentation and and also your story because it's not a common story. And I just, as you kept going, I'm like, what? And but your message that has come out of that is such a good one. So I want to just jump right into that. And you talked about the whole family and that how trauma affects the whole family. And so often, as you know, the focus is on the foster or adopted kids, the kids with that trauma background. And so I wanted to start with parenting kids with trauma backgrounds. So what, I guess maybe you can, even for people on the call, one of the things that you said that kind of struck me was that these therapists didn't understand trauma and that they thought these kids were bad kids. So just to kind of set things up, and if anybody on the call maybe doesn't really understand the difference, maybe you could just give us a little bit about how trauma affects these kids, and then we'll talk about why it's more stressful for parents, or it's actually probably one and the same in the answer, for parents raising kids with this experience, the trauma backgrounds.
Yeah, sure. So just a quick kind of rundown of that. So kids who have experienced early life trauma, most adopted children have experienced early life trauma. And this can look like a lot of different things. So we can go back to even just prenatally. They can experience trauma in the womb, whether that's prenatal drug exposure or some type of prenatal stress. Maybe the biological mother is under a certain amount of stress in her pregnancy, maybe is experiencing domestic violence or something like that, that impacts the development of this child. And so sometimes that child already just comes into the world already having experienced trauma. But then you also have that early life trauma, things like abuse, neglect, multiple placements, the loss of your caregiver, difficult birth, early hospitalization. Those are all different traumas that a child can experience in their first years of life. And all of those things affect the way that a child's brain and body develops. And so certain parts of their brain aren't developed completely if they experience trauma prenatally. But even those first 3 years of life, those are the most critical years of development for a child. And so if they experience trauma in those first 3 years, that affects the way that their brain and body develop across the lifespan. And so that sets them up to struggle with a few different things. With most often, it's things like executive functioning or self-regulation skills, being able to attach to others. And all of this comes from just, again, the way their brains developed. And so oftentimes we talk about kind of living in that survival brain where they just learn to survive their environments. And they've learned, it's all survival strategies. They've learned to adapt. And that's, our brains and bodies are powerful in that way, that we learn to adapt to survive our environments. And that's what these kids do. They learn to adapt, and their brains develop in that way. And so when you bring them into a family that might be a safe, secure, nurturing family, It doesn't matter because their brains and bodies developed in this specific way. And so now they're in this space and they're still struggling. And so oftentimes that in a family that can look like trauma-related emotional and behavior problems. The most common of those in kids who have been adopted are anxiety, depression, hyperactivity, peer problems, anger and aggression, violence. Those are the most common that kids experience. But then they struggle to build relationships because again, they are in that survival brain. They've learned to adapt. They've learned not to trust adults to take care of them. They've learned that adults are not there to provide for them and protect them. And so they push against any of that kind of nurturing care from a caregiver. And so for the caregiver, you can imagine that is just that can be very stressful. Parenting in and of itself is already very stressful. But when you are caring for somebody who's experienced that early life trauma, whose brain and body has developed in this way to adapt to living in an environment of trauma, it's so much more stressful because you often have those daily behavioral and emotional problems from the trauma they've experienced. But then you not only have that daily behavior, but you're also often unequipped and unprepared to meet those needs of that child, and you don't have the supports necessary to meet those needs, which just leads to so much more stress as a caregiver.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. And I even was trauma informed and went through the TBRI practitioner training before we adopted our kid. But then once we brought our kid home, even with that information, the 24/7 of it all was so incredibly hard. And stuff that I thought I had dealt with personally came up, and I realized, like, oh my gosh, my husband and I were just talking about this today. It was like I had to still do more healing because I started to realize that a lot of my reactions were also based on my history. And so I found myself in a place where I'm having to do this discovery and healing of my own history, as well as I'm trying to put out all this energy on the front side to do trauma informed parenting. And like you said, it's just exhausting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And when you are parenting a child who's experienced that early life trauma, that it brings out all your own junk. It brings out all of your own history and it forces you to deal with that to be an effective caregiver.
Yeah. So I heard you in that conference, you talked about what is called blocked care. And I've heard that term sprinkled here and there. It's not very commonly used, but once someone explains it and they have been parenting for a while, they get it. They can resonate with that. So can you explain how what we were just talking about, the stress of all this, can be so difficult and can lead to what is called blocked care, and explaining, like, unpacking how that even happens?
Yeah, sure. So blocked care is a parent's inability to continue to give that empathetic, compassionate, nurturing care consistently over and over and over again. And first off, if we think about a child who has experienced that early life trauma, they have a lot of needs that they often express. They often have a lot of externalizing behaviors that require your constant attention and focus. And so they're constantly expressing these needs, and you're constantly needing to meet those needs. That's exhausting. And so what can often happen is simply as a caregiver, you're struggling to just keep going because, like you said, like it is 24/7. It is one after another after another. And it's just incredibly exhausting. And so just the high stress of parenting a child who's experiencing those behaviors can lead to blocked care, can lead to that inability to continue to give that care. But what's interesting, though, is that it goes so far beyond that because it actually involves the neurochemistry of our brains. And when I used to work as a post-adoption therapist, I would talk about this with my moms I worked with all the time. And it was always very freeing for them to understand what was going on and to have like words around it. But what we don't often talk about, and that's what this blocked care thing is that we are part of, as a caregiver, child's kind of relationship, there's this feedback loop that exists between the caregiver and the child. And so a caregiver gives that care to a child, and when a child receives that care, that parent then actually receives kind of like a release of dopamine and oxytocin in their brains, which is actually part of that motivational reward system in our brains. And so in a typical relationship, say we think about a mother with her baby that she had, the baby cries at night, the baby, in those first few months of life, that baby is crying a lot. And that caregiver is able to continuously meet those needs because they're always getting those feedback cues from the child, where that the caregiver goes to the child is crying, the caregiver calms the child down, and then the child is soothed. And once the child is soothed, and that gives that feedback to the parent, that child responded to their care, and now the parent has an uptake in that reward system. They have more dopamine, oxytocin, which allows them to continue to give that nurturing care over and over again. And in a typical relationship, that kind of, it almost like builds up. You kind of have this jar that just like builds up with more and more of that. And so when you go through those rough patches, maybe you have a colicky baby, or maybe you're having sleep regression, you're still motivated to keep giving that care because it's kind of been built up in that. You have that built up relationship between the two of you where you can continue to give that responsive nurturing care, even if you're not getting that feedback in that small period of time. When you're parenting a child who's experienced trauma, that whole system can be very tricky, because what we know about children who've experienced trauma, they often do not receive that care. They push against that care because, like I said earlier, they don't trust it. They don't trust that you're actually going to provide for them. You're actually going to care for them. You're going to always be there. You're in this position to provide and protect them. They don't trust that. And so they reject that care often. And so when they reject that care, you're not actually getting that feedback loop, and you're not getting that increase in dopamine and oxytocin, which means you're not getting that motivational reward in your brain to tell you to keep going and keep doing this. And so it's actually working against our neurochemistry to keep showing up in this relationship, to keep giving that empathetic, nurturing care when you're not getting that feedback from them.
That was the part when you were sharing in that thing that just got me. I'm like, oh yeah, blocked care. Because I always thought that was like a lame terminology. But when you explained, which I had never heard when people talk about blocked care, that what is blocked is that feedback loop. And I was like, oh gosh, that makes so much sense. And understanding depression and how chemical depression or clinical depression works, we have these dendrites and they like turn into cactus, and what would look like branches of an oak tree turn into a Joshua tree with like 2 branches. So we can't receive those feel good chemicals. I was like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense when you explain it as far as biology goes, that we are actually become blocked. It's like a form of, I don't know, depression. I think of when you were sharing that, I was thinking about our love bucket. And our love buckets, they're so full normally when you have a biological child, and like you were talking, that normal attachment cycle. But then when we take in foster adoptive kids and we don't get that, we have no full buckets. They're empty and they never get full, and it makes sense. Like we have nothing in the reserves to give.
Yeah. And it makes sense too, if you just think about it, even like taking a step back from the foster and adoptive world, but just in any relationship. Like if you're in a relationship with somebody who is fighting against you, is pushing against you, who you don't get along with well, who is resisting you being in their life, you also pull away. Like you're not going to keep going in. So it's very counterintuitive to keep showing up. It's necessary, but it's very counterintuitive to keep showing up in a relationship that's not responding to you.
Yeah, exactly. I find like that's where the hard work is, because, so many of us have worked hard in our lives to have boundaries in relationships. And when a relationship, like you said, is not going well, we have a boundary that we're like, okay, well, this relationship is not healthy. It's not good for me. I'm done with it. But in this situation, you cannot do it. You have to stay there and you do the hard work.
Yeah,
So did
absolutely.
you, how did that play out in your family? Did you see your parents go through that blocked care?
Um, yes, I would say so. I think more so most of my with work with that was really working with my clients in like when I was in clinical practice. Because obviously I'm not working with my mom on improving her blocked care. But yeah, she did like that was definitely a struggle in our family was continuing to be motivated to give that care. And for my mom, there was definitely just that chronic stress piece, just because I mean, my family adopted 7 children within 4 years. And so just bringing home that many children who'd experienced trauma, that also just leaves that chronic stress piece where you are, it's just hard to just keep giving that care because you are so overwhelmed and stressed and burnout.
So what move, well, now that we know like what this is, and I'm hoping some people are going, oh, um, I can relate to that. What can we do if we feel like we're relating to blocked care and maybe have that? How can we improve that and kind of push through or move forward despite that's going on?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is the awareness piece. So check for everyone that's watching because they're like, oh, okay, this is what I can name it now. This is what's happening. And it normalizes it. And it also just kind of takes the shame away from you as a parent, feeling like all of that guilt and shame that can be piled on for not caring for your child in the way that you would want to care for your child, because there's that neurochemistry piece of it, and so that's incredibly powerful in and of itself. But along with that also comes kind of where are you at in this blocked care? What level is your blocked care at? How severe is it? Because if it's severe, that's where I recommend you finding a counselor and working with a counselor on working through that. I've had clients before that have been at the point of like they will admit to me through their sobs of I hate my child, and I would never have said that, because they've just been experiencing this for so long and it's been so severe. And so that's where, okay, you need professional help. You need to be working with somebody specifically on processing your own hurt over that relationship and that block between the two of you. If it's not as severe, it's something that's as simple. It's as simple. I know it's not actually simple for parents, but one of it is caring for yourself. And we talk about all the time in TBRI in our intervention is just the importance of the awareness of your own brain and body, the awareness of your own triggers, of your own things that affect you, and your ability to interact with other people. What dysregulates you? What regulates you? What are effective things that help you cope? And that's really important to be aware of your own needs and how to actually meet those needs as an adult so that you can care well for your child, because it does require so much, like you said earlier, like it just brings out so much as a parent, that you have to work through all that. You have to work through all those things. And so first is just doing that, working through and being aware of what does trigger me, what does dysregulate me, what makes me really upset, what are the things that calm me down and help me to kind of be present with my child. And the other thing with that as well, not only just that awareness piece, but it's also looking at your support system, knowing that and managing your expectations, knowing that at this point, your child has, again, their brain and body has developed in this way to push against your care. But in order to actually form that relationship, in order to actually heal their trauma, you have to be that consistent, nurturing presence in their life. It's a critical requirement of them healing and for you to build that healthy relationship. And so you have to keep showing up in that relationship, which is, like I said, very counterintuitive. It's going against your biology to do that. And so what that requires is for you to have other relationships in your life that provide that nurturing care for you. Maybe it's a partner, maybe it's a best friend, somebody that is there that is providing that care. So you're getting that input from somebody else and managing your expectations, knowing you're not going to receive this input from this child right now. You will eventually if you keep doing this work and you're consistent with it, but right now you're not going to receive that. And so you need to look for that that dopamine and oxytocin that you're going to get from other people in your life that's going to allow you to keep doing this work with your child.
I love that. Such great feedback for that. I do want to ask you about people who do have this severe and need some counseling, some professional help in that, uh, what do they look for real quick? Because I know that some types of therapy and some backgrounds of therapists are going to be helpful and other ones are not. So just so people don't waste their time and money, what do they at least look for so they can at least hopefully get a good head start in finding somebody?
Yeah, I think the first thing is if you're in an area where you are privileged enough to have adoption competent professionals, that's the first thing to look for is somebody who understands that adoption experience, just because like we said, it's so unique. And so looking for clinicians, therapists who specialize in that. It might not be all that they see, but if they see clients who have experienced trauma, that's really important. The other thing too is that and so looking for that and looking for, we also have like our list of TBRI practitioners on our website. And so looking to see if there's practitioners that are in your area who are clinicians that see clients. That's another great place to start. But the other thing too, is that it doesn't even, with this situation, I found before that if you're in an area where there's less resources, where you don't have as many adoption competent professionals, this is actually something that you can work through with a typical counselor, with a therapist who doesn't necessarily have this background, because they're not providing trauma therapy to you. What they're doing is really helping you process through kind of your interpersonal relationships and processing through your thoughts and feelings about this experience, about your caregiving. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who is who specializes in adoption, although that's obviously a plus.
Yeah.
But that's different for, that's the difference with this, is that you can actually go to somebody who doesn't necessarily specialize in this.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Good word there. Are there any books or studies or anything people can look at regarding blocked care if they want to know more?
Oh my gosh, I should have looked up what the book is called. I don't know what the name of it is off the top of my head. I think it's Dr. Hughes, I want to say is what the name is, but it's on blocked care specifically. But I don't think that's the name of the title of the book. I should have looked it up before. But that's a really good resource.
I will get that from you, and when we send a follow-up email to everybody, I'll make sure we get that because I want that too because I know this always comes up.
Yeah.
So we'll get that. So let's move on to adoption trauma, how the trauma affects our biological kiddos. So if we have biological kids in the family, how are these kids who are already in the home being affected? And
Yeah.
this is you, right?
Yeah, this is me. Yeah. Well, first, I want to say it's not just the biological kids in the family. That's actually something I found in my research that was really fascinating to me, is that it's not the adopted kids and the biological kids. What I found actually in my work is that in most families, there is a member of there's one child in the family who is typically adopted, who often has the most externalizing behaviors because of their experience with trauma. And so oftentimes that child actually is kind of the center of the family, and the rest of the members of the rest of the siblings, the rest of the kids in the family kind of function this adoptive sibling role. So it can actually be an adopted child who experiences this adoptive sibling experience as well. But anyway, so yeah, this role in the family, it's definitely, sometimes people say that research is me search because you're actually just doing research on yourself, and that is definitely what happened for me. I did a really big study. It was about 200 adult adoptive siblings who just shared their experiences with adoption in their family, and it was fascinating to see just like how much paralleled my own experience. But one of the big things that siblings often experience is invisibility. Oftentimes, they've actually been coined the invisible children before.
Wow.
Or sometimes they can be called the glass children because their parents see right through them.
Mm.
And so they can be this member of the family who feels really invisible, often because they feel like they're not receiving as much attention from their parents anymore. There's a stark contrast between the relationship that they have with their parents prior to adoption and then what they have with their parents after adoption. And so they can feel like they are kind of pushed to the side, not really seen in their families anymore, and just feel really invisible. And so that's a very common experience. And a lot of that has to do with the parents just needing to focus so much on the needs of the child that just came into their home, or the child that has the most externalizing behaviors. They don't have the capacity to see and meet the needs of every other member of their family. Siblings can also experience parentification, and this can look like one being like another caregiver to their siblings. It also, though, can look like being an emotional support for their parents. And so sometimes that's called spousification, but both things also fall under parentification. And they can go into this role for a few different reasons. One of them is because, again, most often they have this set relationship with their parents prior to adoption. And so they have this way that they this kind of like attachment dance with their parents, and when they adopt, often because parents become so overwhelmed and stressed, parents start to act a little different, and that relationship starts to look a little different. The adoptive sibling has experienced a lot of loss in the process of adoption. And they can also feel like they kind of lose their parents in that process as well, because their parents are so different after adoption. And so sometimes they fall into this parentification role because they want their parents back, and they want to do everything they can to get their parents back. And so if they help kind of ease the burden, help to be another caregiver in the family, maybe they'll be able to get their parents back into their life again. But also, siblings are incredibly empathetic and compassionate. I think it's something about like living in the day-to-day with their siblings who've experienced trauma. And so a lot of times they fall into this parentification role just because they feel so much empathy and compassion towards their sibling that they want to do everything possible to help them as well. So invisibility, parentification, another thing they experience as well is this kind of like peacemaking role that I talk about, which can look like two different things. One is being more of like a mediator in the family, so kind of a mediator between their siblings and their parents, working again to kind of minimize and ease the burden of their parents in the family system. I had one sibling at one of our therapeutic camps told me one time, and I just thought this was like the best illustration of this. He said he felt like his mom was a volcano, and he was so afraid that she was going to erupt one day, and he didn't know what was going to happen when she erupted. And so he did everything possible in his family to make sure she wouldn't erupt, because he had so much fear around what happens when she finally loses her mind, what happens when she finally goes off the deep end. And so he worked to be this mediator, to be this other parent in the family to minimize that. And then siblings can also kind of go into this perfectionist role where they internally work to have no needs, so that their parents don't have to meet any of their needs, and almost unconsciously kind of work to no longer need their parents, and no longer feel that hurt over, okay, I'm a sibling and I'm expressing a need to my parents. My parents don't have the capacity to meet that need. So I'm then hurt because my parents aren't showing up for me and aren't helping me and aren't being the parent I've known. So now I'm just not going to have any needs. Now I'm just going to be perfect. I'm going to do everything myself. I'm going to be independent, so that they don't have to meet those needs. And then on top of all of that is that experience of vicarious trauma that both the parents and the siblings can experience, which is just that experience. We talk about that so much in the helping profession. We don't talk about enough in the adoption and foster community. When you live day to day with somebody who's experienced early life trauma, who has that those daily emotions and behaviors from the trauma they've experienced, that's traumatic to live in that. That can be traumatic. And so often you also just have that experience of both knowing their history, but then also seeing that daily effect of that trauma play out in their life. So yeah, it's a lot.
Oh my gosh, it's so much to think about. And you just think, gosh, like, how does a parent help meet their biological kids' needs also, especially when in the wake of everything that's going on? I can totally see everything you're saying, how they could be invisible, how they could get that kind of pseudo independence, like, oh, I'm just going to not have needs because my needs don't get met. It hurts. Ouch. There's no time for me to get comforted by anybody, so I might as well not have a need and be hurt. So it's also sad thinking about it. How can a parent go about helping not only do you aware and see these kids, their biological kids, I'm sure they see them, love them dearly, right? But what can they do? How can they stretch themselves beyond the needs of the kid that's having the most trauma behavior displayed?
Yeah. Um, that's where everything becomes so much more simplified. I often go through this like very long presentation at our therapeutic camp, similar to what you watched through Replanted, but much longer than that, on all of these experiences of the different members of the family. And it can just feel like you're like so bogged down. And probably most of the people on this call are feeling that right now, like, okay, this is a lot. I'm just trying to meet the needs of my adopted child. Now I have my needs plus the needs of the other kids in the family. But when I did my another research study I did, I also looked at okay, what is it? What is it that makes kind of the maybe the healthiest families, for lack of a better term, the families that feel the most connected, most satisfied, that feel the closest, who have the closest sibling relationships? What is it about those adoptive families? And what I found in that was super fascinating, and I feel like gave so much hope. Because it isn't the did you mess up birth order, that kind of big thing that we talk about in the adoption world. Did you adopt too many kids? Do you have too many kids in your family? Did you adopt a child that had more trauma related needs than what you were capable of being able to handle in that at that time? And what I found in that is that none of those things predicted a family being closer, being more connected, being more satisfied, having closer relationships. It actually had all to do with the communication in the family system. And so
Can we just stop and like celebrate that for a moment? Like just hearing you say that is like huge, you know,
yeah,
like all those things that you listed are all things that all of us feel guilty about or ashamed about or think, you know, gosh, could we roll back time? And so just hearing you say that, um, you know, it's all about something else and like kind of, I think that helps relieve some of the guilt. So I'm so excited. I just had to stop and say, you know, hallelujah for you saying that.
yeah, I actually had one of the times at a camp, I had a dad who just started, he was a very stoic man, but in all of this, just broke down crying at one point and said, did I ruin everything? Did I mess up our family because I adopted too many kids? Because I brought home this one child that had such severe needs that we didn't know how to handle, because I moved our family, because I did all these different things. Did I ruin it? Did I ruin our family? And I think that was it was so cool in that moment to be able, and so much so hope filled to be able to say, you didn't. Like, I can prove to you this huge study I did that you didn't. Like, it has all to do with your communication. And that's something you can change now. It's not something that you did 15 years ago and now you're stuck in it, because now you have, like in my family, you have 12 kids and now you have to figure out how to do this. Like, no, you can change the way that you communicate in your family. So it's super hopeful. Yeah.
Awesome. So I love that. So tell us all this great, wonderful research, communication, like that's big. We're all like, yeah, we all need to communicate, but obviously we're not doing it to the best that we can.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So
complex.
really, so I simplify it as much as possible because I'm fully aware of the adoptive family system and what happens at home all the time. But I have this kind of, this is the way of these 5 different steps of building communication in your family. The first one is really for caregivers to start with mindfulness. So being mindful of your own state. That's what I talked about much earlier. And this is where it's not, what's helpful is that it's not like, here's your adopted kids, here's your bio kids. It's everything together. This is your whole family system. And this will improve things both for your bio kids and your adopted kids and your family. And so that first is that it's that mindfulness piece, being aware and attuned to what's happening in your own brain and body as a parent. I give this example. I need to probably stop giving this example because my parents gave me they're like, yeah, go ahead and share this. But I've shared this now like so many times to like thousands of people, but here I am still doing it. So, but when I was at home, living at home as a teenager, it was really hard. As you can imagine, there were so many kids in my family, some really severe trauma. And I just really struggled. And I would try to go to my mom and say, Mom, this is just really hard. I'm really struggling with this. And she would respond with, not in a very good way, she would respond with, "But you don't want them to go back to the orphanage, do you?" And every time, and she said it to me multiple different times. And it was so hurtful for me in those moments, because what I was wanting from my mom was connection. I was wanting my mom to say, yeah, this is really hard. Give me some encouragement, some support. Hey, we're in this together. But instead, because she wasn't mindful of her own emotional state, she went into this space and she was triggered. She was triggered by what I had said, because the reality was, and we've had that conversation many years later, she had no idea that adopting my siblings was going to affect all the rest of the kids in the family. And so that hurt her. It was really hard for her to kind of wrap her mind around that. And so that triggered her from me just saying that to her. And so she didn't respond in a positive way to allow us to have a conversation that was needed. And so that mindfulness piece is so important, to be aware of your own emotions, be aware of your own triggers, and know how to meet your own needs, so that you can show up for these conversations with your kids, and be able to be present and receptive to what they have to say. Another couple of things to do as well is they kind of go hand in hand. One is modeling openness, and the other is asking hard questions. And so we can't, in order to have like healthy communication in our family, when I talk about having healthy communication, what I'm talking about is creating a home where you're able to talk freely about your thoughts and feelings, where it's a safe space to be able to do that, and knowing that your thoughts and feelings might be different than other members of your family, but it is a safe space to talk about these things together. And so if we want our kids to do that, we have to do that first as parents. We have to first show up and model that, and be able to share our own emotions, to share your own thoughts about, and it could be like, I'm really struggling with this today, or this is really hard for me. Parents, like we said, they get really stressed, they get really overwhelmed. Model that, like state your feelings, identify what you're feeling, express what you're doing to take care of that. Those are really important things to model that for your kids. But the other thing too with modeling that openness is that we often, in the adoption world, don't talk about the good things and the hard things together. So a lot of times we are so afraid to talk about those hard things, because we don't want to say, like, for example, like in my family, where I wanted to be like, this is really hard right now. My mom was so afraid to go there, because it meant, did we do the wrong thing by adopting? Did we do the wrong thing by doing this? It just brings up so much uncertainty and insecurity. And so we don't often have those conversations about those hard things, but those hard things exist. And they coexist together in everything in our life. The good things and the hard things are always there together. I talk about sometimes with like adoption itself is 100% sorrow and 100% joy. They both go together. And it's really important to talk about those things, to talk about those hard things. Because if you don't talk about those hard things, they're not ever going to change, because you're not bringing awareness to them and actually working through them. So it's just really important to model that openness. One of the ways that to make it as simple as possible is just to one time a day as a parent, one time a day, make sure that you're identifying one of your emotions to your kids, that you're saying something about your thoughts, your feelings in that day, just one thing, and making sure you're doing that with each of your kids every day. And it could be, maybe you all eat dinner together at night. And so you just share, like every night, you make sure that you're opening up to them, you're sharing that, because what they're going to learn from that is that it's safe and normal for me to also share my own thoughts and feelings. And then with that then comes that, then asking those questions of them. Once you start to model that openness, they learn that it's safe and normal to share those thoughts and feelings. You start asking those hard questions. You start asking them about how they feel about certain things. What are their thoughts about these things? And if you do that consistently over time, and you're modeling that this is safe and normal to have these conversations, they will open up to you and they will share what they're struggling with. And that really gives you an opportunity to then problem solve with them, to help them work through, okay, what is it that we can do together to make this better? In an intervention that I created for my dissertation, actually, they do this whole exercise where the family works together to problem solve, where every member of the family kind of comes together almost for a family meeting, and they just share what they're struggling with in their family, and the parents work with the kids to work through, okay, what's a tangible, concrete way we can make this better? Examples from our therapeutic camp that we do, because we also do this activity there. Sometimes for siblings, it's just a matter of like, I need a quiet space so that when my sibling is tantruming and really struggling, I have a place to go where I'm removed from it. It's just something as simple as that, that a parent can make sure, okay, I can create this space for you and we can have a plan so that when this happens, you have a place to go so you're not exposed to the trauma. So just things like that, just very tangible, concrete things. Most of the time though, a lot of that comes back to them wanting to have one-on-one time with their parents or having time to connect with each other. And so incorporating that into your life as well, which is not, which you might be like that, yeah, Jana, there's no way I can do that. But it doesn't have to be like you're going on like a date with your child once a week and you're picking a different child. It could just be 10 minutes in the car on the way to basketball practice. You're having an intentional conversation with your child and you're talking to them and it's quality time. It's just something as simple as that, of just making the most of that time you have together and really digging into what are you thinking, what are you feeling, so that you're aware of what's going on in their life and you can meet those needs and they know they can come to you with what those needs are. And then on top of all of that, in order to build that communication as well, is one is just being receptive. It's just being receptive to what your kids have to say. And that goes back to that mindfulness piece, knowing that they might have very different thoughts and feelings than you do. They might say something that upsets you, but taking a step back and knowing, okay, this is their experience, this is not my experience. And so they might be struggling with this and that's okay. And as the parent, I'm going to show up and be here with them for this. I'm going to be receptive to what they have to say. I'm going to work through this with them. And know that it's okay because they have, every member of the family has a different personality, has different characteristics. Everyone's going to experience everything in your family differently. And as a parent, your job is to meet those needs. And so this is a very easy way to do that. And then the last thing is just affirming their preciousness. We talk about that again all the time with the need to affirm the preciousness of kids who've experienced early life trauma because they were told over and over again that they're not valuable, they're not loved. But the other kids in the family have that same need. They have that same need to hear, I love you, I value you, I'm so glad you're part of this family, you are such a great kid. Because they often experience that invisibility, because they often feel like they're pushed aside, because they often feel like they don't really have their parent anymore. And they need that constant affirmation as well. So all of that together, some of the easiest things that I say, one is just, like that first, being aware of your own thoughts and feelings, being aware of what triggers you, what affects you, and working to find the things that help calm you down so you can be present with your kids. The next is just like once a day to identifying a thought or feeling to your kids, sharing that with your family, something that you're thinking and feeling. The other thing is once a day, asking a question. And again, this could be around family dinner. Maybe you go around and you talk about one good thing and one hard thing that happened in your day. Just a simple kind of check-in that you can do once a day. And then also once a day, make sure you're telling your kids that you love them. Make sure you're telling them how much they matter to you. And so it's really simple things that don't take a lot of energy and don't take a lot out of your life. It's not like a whole new intervention you have to learn, but they're super effective in building this environment that you want for your family.
I love that. Such great information. And I think it's stuff that we all can probably be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so just hearing that your research has shown that that is what pulls a family forward into health and not necessarily stops the hard stuff from happening, but helps you all be in it together. So I appreciate hearing all of those things. And I'm wondering if maybe you could share some stories, either, personal stories or from people you've worked with, and share what this process looked like and how long does it take, and what that journey can be like, just to make it even more personal and concrete for us, like, and take the words off the page, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, first, how long it's going to take a long time. Like, this is something that these are big habits that you're changing in your family. One of the families that we had that came to our therapeutic camp, I get to do both like the parent training there and then also work with the siblings and families. And so I get to see a lot of it in action. And it is And so much from the siblings I have heard over and over again, just the desire to spend time with their parents, the desire to have one-on-one time with them, the desire to just be able to talk to their parents about what they're thinking and feeling, and the parents often being so unaware of what was even going on with the other kids in the family because they're so stressed and overwhelmed. And so I had one family who, I mean, this actually happens every camp. Most of the families experience this, but we're able to sit down together, and just the kids were able to share, hey, this is what I'm really struggling with. And as the kids cried, the parents were able to sit there and comfort them and meet their needs. And sometimes the kids are, especially if they're teens, can be very resistant, thinking, okay, well, my parent has been this way since day one, and I don't expect anything to change, and I don't trust that they're going to change and do anything different. And that can be really hard when you have a caregiver who hasn't necessarily been very nurturing or express their emotions and thoughts very much in the family. It can be hard to think that, okay, all of a sudden now they're going to start showing up. And so I had one family who had 2 teenagers, and who were very much like, I'm not sharing this with my parents. There's no way I'm sharing this with my parents. And we sat down, and I encouraged them to find, like, you know what, I think they're ready for this. I think they can hear this. And I sat with there's a family of 8, and I sat down with them, and the teenage girls were able to share what they were struggling with in their family, that were really big, deep-seated things that really affected the way they lived their everyday life, not just in their family, but in other relationships in their life. And their parents were able to, I mean, the parents are crying because they had no idea this is what the experience was of their girls in their family. And they were able to just affirm them in that moment, able to say, I love you so much. And I'm so sorry this has been your experience. I had no idea. But here are the things that I'm learning, and I want to do better. And I want you to trust that I'm going to do better. And so they did that. Like that in that moment. And that's why this is so powerful, this problem solving piece of things, because in that moment, this family was finally able to get to this place of the girls trusting their parents are actually going to show up for them this time. Their parents are actually going to change something. And so they went home, and it completely changed their family. Mm-hmm. Again, just these really simple things, but it opened the door to have these really hard conversations. And it changed the way their family communicated, not just about adoption, but about everything that happens in a family's life. Being able to talk about the hard things and the good things, trusting their parents to hear what they had to say and hear what they were struggling with, and then also help them problem solve and figure out how to make this better with them. That their parents cared enough, not even just to listen, but they cared enough to actually figure out how to change the way that their family operated together, which is a really big deal when caregivers are kind of stuck in, this is the way I always do things. So yeah, it's incredibly powerful.
Wow. Well, I appreciate it. So much great information. Thank you so much. I feel like we need to kind of wrap it up and move on, but I feel like something that, like, I know I've done in my journey as I'm learning more about how to regulate myself and how to communicate with my kids in this kind of open way that you're sharing, is just giving voice to that out loud to them and letting them know, like, hey, I'm feeling dysregulated right now. I need to go for a walk so I don't say something that I don't mean. And then when we come back, maybe we can discuss it then. Like, just the things, like you're saying, the mindfulness piece of it, but verbalizing that out loud so that they see that self-awareness, or like what you're talking about, like, hey, you guys, like, I did things like this, but I really want to change things. So now I'm going to try to do things like this, like kind of stating those things that you're thinking. So many times I know for myself, I think things and I don't often use the language. So I think using the language, like you said, is so key to helping our kids be on board with what this change is happening.
Yeah, and an apology goes a long way. I think what's interesting is that caregivers of kids who've experienced trauma often like just struggle with so much uncertainty and doubt, and they can feel so much shame and guilt. But because of that, a lot of times they struggle to actually apologize and admit when they've been wrong with their kids. But that's so necessary. One, it builds that connection between the two of you, but it also models all of that for your child. It models how to apologize. It normalizes making mistakes and how to fix them. And so with your kids, just apologizing when you mess up, and that's huge for connection.
Yes, yes. And I can say from experience, apologies do get easier. They're hard to choke out, in the beginning, but you do get more comfortable with it, like you're saying. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to this. I have 3 questions that I ask everybody as I wrap it up. Um, and my first question to you is, what brings you joy?
The first thing that comes to mind, my youngest brother is 13. He just turned 13 a couple weeks ago, and he just got a talk text phone, and he is calling me and texting me all the time, and he's hilarious. And he's very much exactly what you'd expect of a baby of 12 kids. So just last night he called me and he was like, I need to talk to my therapist, so I called you. It's just a lot of fun. So him and his phone bring me a lot of joy. We're 15 hours away, so being able to talk to him is fun.
Oh, that's so special. That's so special. So, if you could say one thing to your younger self when you first started this adoption journey, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. Um, I think I would just say that you're so much more worthy than you think you are, that you matter and that you're valuable just for being you and not for what you do, not for how you help or what you accomplish. But you're just valuable for who you are.
Oh, that's beautiful. Speaks into what you've been telling us. Um, and lastly, what foster adoption myth would you like to just blow up right now?
There's so many of them.
I know.
I think the biggest one, and I hope that's what something that people can take away from this conversation is, I think one of the things that I learned in my work is that it's not just we in the adoption and foster community, we focus so much on the trauma that the adopted or foster child's experienced, and we spend so much time focusing on that. And we unintentionally kind of make them the scapegoat for our families, blaming the stress and the chaos on the trauma, on the adoption. And the reality is, what I've learned from my work is that it's not about the adopted child. It's about the family system, and the way in which, again, the family communicates, the way the family functions. And we have to start paying attention to the whole family system, all the different relationships in the family, all the different individuals, what they're bringing to the table, what they're struggling with, how they're managing the different things. And that's where, if we start focusing on that, that's where all the stress and chaos is coming from. But also that's where that true healing is going to come from, if we start paying attention and working to meet the needs of every member of the family, rather than just focusing and unintentionally blaming the adopted child for the problems in the family.
That's good. That's good. Um, Everyone needs to hear that in the beginning when they're first exploring foster and adoption. And I think the climate's changing for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on and having a conversation with me. I'm going to link or send in the follow-up email the book that you talked about. I'm going to send a link to your article again, if people didn't catch it, that you wrote, that kind of summarizes some of this stuff that we've talked about. And I just want to let everybody know that in December, I'm going to have another guest on, and we're going to talk about holiday hardships. So stay tuned for that. You'll probably get another email about that if you've registered today for Replenish. So I just want to say to stick around for our after party from 5:30 to 6, where we'll continue this conversation for anybody who wants to talk about what we just heard, ask the community questions, or just listen in. And that this time is for you. We'll make some connections, we'll unmute. And I just want to thank Jana for joining the Replenish conversation. We appreciate you and your time, and we value your contribution. And thank you all who called in to this week's Replenish Zoom. I pray you are all who are struggling during this time feel replenished and receive some hope to sustain you. Don't forget to join us in our private Facebook group for parents. safe, precious, and heard. And until next time, remember there's no such thing as a perfect parent, only a growing parent. All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Jana. Appreciate your time. So anybody who wants to go ahead and log off now, we